My goal was to sell to Michael Jordan. Sean introduced me to Richard Dent, who was still playing football. Richard was playing for the Indiana Colts then. Richard adopted me like family. I told him I want to meet Michael. He's like, Scott, Michael's a superstar, and that is a hard thing, and Michael doesn't let people into his life very easily.
OG, two letters that define respect. I created the original OGs to document the forgotten parts of American history. I want to recognize and give a voice to the men and women that have climbed to the top of their game. The men and women this marquee have been authenticated as original OGs. Welcome to my world, a world of the originals, the unique. Welcome to the original OGs. Welcome to the original OGs, and I'm your host, OG Mr. Rick. Before we start, I want to say to you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like and share. I don't use this much, but today the story is so interesting, I don't want to miss anything. My guest today is Scott Anthony, an entrepreneur, lifelong fighter, and a former Cuban cigar smuggler who made more than 50 trips to Havana getting cigars, moving millions in product and building a global underground network. He's been haunted by the FBI, the DEA, the U.S. Marshals, and Interpol, built criminal enterprises in Chicago and Havana, lived years as a fugitive, and later reinvented himself. Redemption, that's the most important part. In as a fugitive, later he went to Mexico managing world-class fighters and rubbing shoulders with champions. Is an author of Smoke. Smoke is a confession of Cuban cigar smugglers. This man has already lived 10 lives in one.
I wanted to be a
wanted
gangster.
to be one of them.
That's it. I wanted to be a gangster. At that level down at the bottom, you don't see these other people as role models because it's kind of out of our reach. And because I was in the bad kids circuit, it was all thugs. There were no good boys in there. So you got so many gangs we never even heard of.
And nobody's playing games.
Nobody's playing games. There's a lot of violence.
Okay.
Especially in the penitentiary, which is maximum security. It's called, they have the grades. So when you go to penitentiary level, maximum security, violence all day long.
It's a whole nother game.
It's a whole nother game. People don't get it.
Amen.
El Reno, I went through Atlanta Federal Prison, the penitentiary. That place is intense. And both Atlanta and El Reno have the Cubans. So you got that whole group of Cuban refugees. Most of them are mentally ill. Hey, rough place.
Those that can think, they run shit.
Yep. I know what I'm talking about because I lived it and I was there. Michael Francesi, I saw a clip of his and he hit the nail on the head. He said, 3 words you got to learn to survive in prison. Thank you, please, excuse me. And he said there's a lot of guys in prison that didn't get the respect they think they deserve on the street, and they're going to kill people to prove who they are in prison. So you had a lot of that stuff, and again, it's culture. But luckily it didn't, and I didn't, as a young man, I didn't measure danger at all.
When was it your first prison experience?
Oh, that was as a juvenile. I was in the Audi home. Anybody that remembers, the Audi home was on Hamlin, Roosevelt, Ogden area. I was a regular. Every single cop in my district knew me, and I was the most likely suspect when anything happened. I got a beating at least twice a week. The worst beatings I've ever had in my life were at the hands of police. I never once made a complaint. I never went and filed something. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to up my game and make money and become somebody in life.
That they couldn't put their hands.
Because I didn't have a voice or a vote. But as I grew and I watched these older guys and their game, they couldn't be touched. Because when I became a real street legend and I was making money and I felt it, and it was exhilarating. It was it was an aphrodisiac. I was in and out of the county jail more times than I could count.
Right.
But the guys our age looked at me and they knew that he's from the street.
You reeked with it.
You walked it. Your gestures, the way you moved, your eyes, people just know that's a real MFer.
It's a different personality.
I had a lot of warrants, and I had a lot of, the feds were all over me. I had a Secret Service warrant because there was a period of my life where I was doing counterfeit money, and I was fairly good at it. And so the feds wanted to know if there was more of that money, because there was at one point $20 million, and they had got their hooks on $1 million of it, or whatever we had left from it. This was the peak of my life. This was peak of my street life. December 1986, I was running loads from Miami back and forth. I had a lot of Hispanic contacts, and we'll go into some of that stuff because I was really, really militant with money.
Right.
You didn't pay me, I was coming for you. And anybody out there that I did this to, you deserved it. If I went after anybody and I was harsh and the punishment was brutal, because I didn't grow up with money, it wasn't easy to make, I'm risking my life every day, I'm coming for you. There is no loyalty in the underworld, especially Michael Franzese can tell this story better than anybody. His own father was involved in maybe the planning of his son's murder because you broke the rules. And it's just become a dog-eat-dog thing. Your own people will take you out.
Yeah, it's a whole nother game.
So there's a lot of betrayal.
You do that, then you get into this cigar thing.
I want to make something clear. A lot of people say, who is he? I never heard of him. That's the way it's supposed to be. Because I was the real deal. And I'm only willing to speak about it because when you are a real gangster, it's this. When I started making money and I said, I like this, I ruined it. Mm-hmm. So I was selling, I started getting out of the gangs in the late 70s, started robbing drug dealers.
Okay.
That was my first introduction into the larger drug world. So I started robbing drug dealers, and I had to sell it to turn it into cash.
Hello.
And that turned into the next business. So now I was selling, robbing. I supplied Fluky Stokes, 1987, the 18th of January, I was pulled over in Georgia by the Highway Patrol with a car loaded with Colombian cocaine. Pulled me over. I had a hidden compartment in the suitcases, and they'd searched that car 3 times and didn't find it. And then another patrol car came and they searched it again. They found it, and I took off and I got away. 3 days in the woods, came back to Chicago. I was officially on the run. And I got betrayed by more people than I can count. And I have a personal experience with, and I was officially on the run. I took off. I was a fugitive for 5 years. They caught me. I have the newspaper article. I sent it to you. It was 5 years and 1 day. They caught me on January 19th, 1992, took me back to Georgia. The Colombians, they sent me their own lawyer. And I figured out in a couple weeks that all they cared about is that I wasn't cooperating against them. They didn't care about me or my family. They just cared. They wanted that lawyer to know what I was doing, and I was offended. I made a promise to myself that day that I wasn't going to disappoint any more people in my life because I had disappointed many people up until that point. Everybody. And where I was headed, I could see it. It was death or life in prison. So made that promise. I went and did my Fed stuff, and I got 8 years of Fed paper. I went back to Mexico and started rebuilding I had opened a small gym, a health club, and I started training fighters. I'm struggling doing this, back and forth to Mexico, bringing boxing gloves. I'm actually schlepping. I am trying to make an honest living.
Right.
But it's all around me. The offers are that not only here, but in Mexico, the people are saying, you want a ton? You want this? I'll hook you up. And the temptation is so strong, but I know the truth. I know where it's headed. And Thomas Garwood, my attorney, he's in my head. And I say, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. I went to Cuba. I went to Havana, Cuba on a vacation. I had always wanted to go. And I bought 2 boxes of cigars off of these Cubans that came, who was a doctor. And his brother was a doctor and in the military in Cuba and wanted me to bring a bag of goodies for him because they're starving. I brought it to them, so they offered me cigars, and out of pity, I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I left them in the hotel room, and my buddy who was with me said, "You're going to leave that?" I said, "Yeah, what am I going to do with them?"
They're Cuban.
And he said, "They're Cubans. You paid for them. Bring them." I gave 1 box to a friend of mine in Chicago, a lifelong childhood friend who I had started out in the business, and he was rolling, my buddy Brett. And he looked at me and laughed because I had my 2 big suitcases of boxing gloves that I was selling. And he said, "You still dealing with that stuff?" I said, "Yeah, I make some money and pay some bills." And he said, "How much you make?" I said, "I pay my bills, make about $500. And he laughed. "I make that in a minute." He said, "You got any more of those cigars?" I said, "I got 1 box left. You smoked them already?" And he said, "No, I sold them." I said, "You sold them? How much?" He said, $25 a piece. Bang, bang, bang. I calculated. Light bulb went off, $625. And I said, "Hey, if I could get more of those, you think I could sell them here?" He said, "For sure." And I said, "Where would I sell them?" And he said, "Howard Frum." Howard Frum is the Rolex king of Chicago. And I had known Howard since the early 80s. And I said, "You think Howard would be okay with that?" And I had introduced him to Howard, so I had a deeper relationship. He said, "Howard likes you. Of course he would." I swear to you, I couldn't sleep until that trip was over. I went back to Mexico, got on the phone, started calling anybody and everybody, and I got a lead for a Cuban guy. He sold me 40 boxes of Cuban cigars for $110 a piece. I didn't know anything about them.
Right.
I got the pictures that day laid out on the desk. I didn't know the sizes, the shapes. I went to Chicago. I sold them all and turned it into 12 grand at Howard Frum Jewelers. He helped me do it. He called everybody he knew.
We got Cubans.
Got Cubans. I got a guy here with Cubans. I went back. I bought his remaining 120 boxes. I came back, but the journey, Rick, was anything but easy. I went back and forth, and eventually he ran out of cigars, and he said to me, "Scott, I never had a customer like this. What are you doing? And and I don't have any more." And I got a guy who knew a guy, got on a plane, and I made over 50 trips. It's actually over 60 trips to Cuba, packing up my cigars. And there's 2 versions of Cuban cigars. There's original factory store-bought cigars, and then there's what's commonly known as street cigars. And those are stolen. Any way they can get them, they put them together. And it's a dangerous, slippery slope because, anybody who's hungry and trying to make a buck, they'll sell you out and throw you under a bus. They're only concerned about the $2 they're going to make and not the quality. What ended up happening is I got called out on it a handful of times by people. "Hey, are these street cigars? This is wrong, that's wrong." I didn't know the difference, but I educated myself. I started reading, bought books. There was no computers back then to do research. And I took the tours at the Cuban factories. I had to up my game because the level of clientele that I was dealing with, it was an honor. I never sold a cigar ever that wasn't legitimately from Cuba. But the quality of the street cigars can be questioned, and sometimes it's bad. And I was called out, and I said, that's it. Goal number 1, because there's an embargo against Cuba, people started getting arrested and going to prison. There's a lawyer here in Chicago. His name was Richard Mickey Connors. He wrote a book. Think about this. He wrote a book while he was smuggling cigars in the same period I was, mid-90s. And he got arrested. He got disbarred. They took away his license to sell, to be a lawyer. He went to prison for 3 years. They confiscated his house. My goal was to sell to Michael Jordan. Who can spend money on cigars, especially Cubans, guys who are players? And these are the top of the top businessmen, stockbrokers. Most of them were business owners. And lo and behold, I met Sean Gale. Sean introduced me to Richard Dent, who was still playing football. Richard was playing for the Indiana Colts then. I told him I want to meet Michael. He's like, Scott, Michael's a superstar, and that is a hard thing, and Michael doesn't let people into his life very easily. And I remember Richard preparing me for Michael. Got to give you the rundown. He's like, Scott, don't invade Michael's private space. You don't ask him for an autograph and don't ask him for any of that stuff. We'll do that on the side. But so I went to Michael's house. I would go to Michael's house and I would sell him the top of the top cigars. So I had the luxury and the experience to coexist with Michael Jordan. That was pretty cool.
I want to know about the first time you put these cigars in front of Michael Jordan.
I showed up at Michael's gate out in the suburbs, number 23 on the gate. And now Michael had, that wasn't the first time he received my cigars, but it's the first time I met him. I showed up at Michael's house with my wife and my then 5-year-old daughter. Michael's no nonsense, and he wanted the best. So I started, it wasn't like there was a reaction to Michael when he got them, because I brought in my 4 bags, and Michael's like, I want that, I want that, I want that. And then it was like, can you get this? I said, I'll work on it, Michael. And this was one thing. What can you get that's special that nobody else can get? And I said, I got it for you, Michael. I had a roller in, her name was Andrea, and she had been Fidel's personal roller. So they were like a movie, Fidel's personal rollers at the El Laguido factory. That's where they made the Cohibas, and it was in a beautiful fraction of Cuba where Fidel had one of his private residences very close to there. So she was locked in a room. They were searched before they went into the room and searched before they came out to make sure nobody's poisoning Fidel, because the CIA had a plan to poison him through his cigars. So armed guards preparing this, and now she was a civilian again and working at a renowned factory store, and she could hand roll cigars that nobody else could get. So do you know what the Bellicoso is, the torpedo, those pointy ones? So you have the Monte Cristo number 2, Diplomatico, there's torpedoes. Well, she could make those in the double Corona size.
Wow.
But they didn't have a mold. They had to make them with a newspaper. She was a skilled craftsman. So she made the mold formed them out of newspaper, and it took a long time. And then they had one that's called, they think they call it like a Salamao. It has this funny shape, and same thing, extra large, and I had those made for Michael, but it backfired on me. I had to wait for her to hand make those. They were really, really expensive. They cost me in Cuba $300 for what's called a maso, and it's a bundle.
The best tobacco in the world. A ver, nos explicas de esos tabacos.
And handmade, hand-rolled, premium, hand-picked tobacco made for Michael. I sell a bunch of these to Michael, and then some guy, we're surrounded by know-it-alls that know nothing. He tells Michael, those are fakes. And Michael said, fakes? So I get a phone call from Michael. And, I get the phone call from Richard. And Richard's like, you got to calm Michael down right now, Scott. So I call Michael, and he's like, these are fake, Scott, and what's up with all? And I said, Michael, please hear me out. I get these, you wanted special, what no one can get. He said, this guy pulls out a book and he shows Michael, look, they're not in the book. Well, the book is for me and you. These are for presidents and dignitaries. This
Right.
woman makes these handmade.
Ya estamos filmando.
Mira.
¿Y esos tabacos, por qué solamente gente influente y gente pesada los consigue?
Porque estos tabacos no se hacen para la producción, se hacen nada más para un pedido, pero el nombre de para un pedido especial para un personaje.
¿Y no tienes que saludos a mandar a alguien?
I said to Michael, I would never, ever pull anything like that on you. It is an honor that you befriended me and trust me. Michael, I swear to you. And then and he calmed down, and I went back to Cuba, and I had that woman. I have the video. I found it the other day, and my editing team, because she says,
Ahí está.
For you.
¿Y la otra? Wow.
Wow.
Michael Jordan, these are made for you. And look, I come from nothing. I worked hard. I wanted to learn how to speak and how to carry myself and how to act to become a human and, quote, a somebody. I was hurt that day. It was a hard pill to swallow. I'm still being scrutinized, and I'm doing my best. There was a time that I brought street cigars, but they were still Cuban. And I met this Cuban man, a character. He's still alive, Don Arturo Brigante. He looked like a Cuban man out of a movie. A little chubby, wife-beater t-shirt, gray-white hair, slick back, gold chains, smoking always with a Cuban cigar in his mouth. And his cooler next to where he sat, his son was my first supplier, so we became good friends. He had a cooler, a styrofoam cooler, and he used like some metal wire, made a grate, homemade, everything homemade, the bottom filled with water, and he laid his Cuban cigars in there as a humidor. No need to waste money on all this fancy stuff. He knew better than any of us about Cuban cigars.
Right.
And so I asked him, hey, Don Arturo, what's your preferred cigar? And he said, Cuban. And I said, yeah, I know, but which one? He said,
Right.
Cuban. I said, any special size you like? He said, whatever my son gives me. It's a Cuban cigar. I said, what brand?
Cuban.
He looked at me and said, Cuban. And then he educated me, and a lot of people don't want to hear this, and they don't like it. A Cuban cigar is a Cuban cigar, period. There is no difference between any brand. That is folklore and a blatant lie. It is marketing. The Cuban tobacco is rolled in Cuba, and I will tell anybody, I am an expert. You can quiz me, and I am an expert. If anybody was, any so-called connoisseur was given two cigars, and you said, this is, you tell me which one is factory and which one is street, you couldn't pick it. If they told you, you tell me which one is one brand and which one is another, you couldn't pick it without the label. The labels are marketing. And would you like me to educate your clientele a little bit on cigars?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Cigars were originally, an indigenous thing in Cuba. They used to send them, the European explorers used to come to Cuba. They would bring them back to their country, Spain, England, Portugal, wrapped in pigskins to keep them humid, moist, and to keep the water and the salt from damaging on the trips. The pigskins worked really well. And then when they got to their country, these were only given to high society.
Right.
The guys rowing the boats didn't get a cigar.
Right.
And fine Cuban cigars were probably given first to the king. And what happened is they wore white gloves back then. Gentlemen wore white gloves. They would get stained from the cigars. So they originally started putting a white band on it. And then someone came up with this marketing idea. Well, since I'm going to give them to the king or the queen, their label, the king of Spain, the queen of Spain, and then it became my label. And then later on, it became the factories putting just their label. And then it turned into what we now know. You and I spoke about it earlier. Nothing is real or true. So they put all these brands in Partagas factory in Havana. They make like 40 different brands. So you're going to tell me that they keep track? This roller only makes this brand. They mix them all into a big basket and they put any brand.
But that was pretty brilliant for him to put the king's label on.
Cigars became my next opportunity. And it was a gray line because I was on federal paper. Cigars are prohibited. They are illegal. You don't mess with the government. You're never going to win. You can't beat them, join them. And the truth is, hey, if something is a law and it's illegal and you get caught, well, you deserved it. You had your opportunity not to do it.
You're going to get spanked.
And so I saw the writing on the wall, this is coming. I was very careful. I ran this like I ran the Coke business. And I had one goal in mind. I'm going to, again, it was my next chance to get from A to S without going through the whole alphabet. I'm going to cheat a little bit. I didn't spend the money on anything but my future. I built my gym, built my life. And when I saw that was coming, it was drawing closer. There were investigations. And unfortunately for some of the people, I used to organize trips and I'd have a bunch of people carrying suitcases for me. They were ending up in jail in Cuba. Wow. So I had people I was insulated, but then I had a couple customs guys that I paid to get them out. They told me, Scott, you're on the radar, you got to stay out. So I went to court in Cuba and I was exiled for a year. And then I started doing strictly factory cigars. And it kept me out of harm's way in Cuba, but I had to get through the Mexican system to the border and deal with the cartels to get them to the other side. It was a lot of stress. It was a lot of hard work, but the coin was there.
Let me. You say you stuck to factory cigars. Were they illegal?
Factory cigars were not illegal, but they were almost impossible to get.
Really?
You couldn't because it was limited supply. There was a huge demand throughout the world, and they've got to appease their sponsors. So they're real legitimate big customers. Spain, England, Canada, the official Havanos stores in these countries, they put in an order and they got to fill it.
But they're legal.
They're legal in Cuba.
Right.
Oh, in the U.S., it's all ATF. You're going to prison.
There
is an embargo and there's taxes.
And it's
alcohol,
still there.
Tobacco and firearms. It's still there today.
Yeah.
They get confiscated and you can go to prison. And the amount I was bringing, I sent you the newspaper article when I got one of my loads confiscated in Nogales, Arizona, Nogales, Mexico, almost 5,000 cigars. That was a $100,000 hit I took. I was beating my head against the wall. I wanted to throw in the towel many times because it was a brutal process. And the drug dealers go through the same process.
Right.
Their shipments are going down all the time, but the volume makes up for it. So I got them taken away at the border, from the U.S. border. It came out on the front page in Nogales and the front page in Nogales, Mexico. And it was very hard, but I was resilient and I was a man on the mission because to me, I wasn't disappointing my attorney, Thomas Garwood. It was cigars. Come on, it's a gray line. Me, I was on 8 years federal paper. I would have gone right back in, and I would have had to do that 8 years. And these other guys, the lawyer got 3. There's a group out of California. They got 10 years.
Here on this show, we have the OG. We define it here. It's the original gentleman.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, most people say or think that this is the original gangsters. No, this is bigger than original gangster. And that's what this is, the original gentleman. How do you see and define the OG?
The person who survived and is still there.
Thank you.
That's probably the first and simplest answer to that question. I know some guys that are OGs, but they didn't do anything with their life except they're alive. Nothing else. I don't know if you can classify them as OGs. I think OGs, you have to have not only made it and you're alive, but done something to give back.
You have to give it back. You have to take what you've done with your life and give it back.
This is the school. This is where your students learn. 9 months of training to be classified rollers. They only make the small cigars, and they're paid nothing. Smoking cigar. have your 4 different leaves. Your filler, your binder, your case, your smell, all of it. On crystal number 2, torpedoes. That's it.
Ese es el Montecristo número A, Montecristo número A o Sancho Panza. ¿El Sancho Panza de cuál es? Sancho.
¿Cómo está? This is quality control. After they're checked, cut, put in the boxes, marked, wrapped, abandoned. Small cigars. Bigger cigars. Montecristo A's.
No, pero yo no veo.
This is a pre-caster box
Don Joaquín.
of cigars. Pre-caster.
Un pedido que has comprado
No se nota muy bien en el filmado. There are your boxes. Boulevard. Boulevard Poquito. This is how your boxes are tied. Color code. This is what we color code. Color. It's hard to notice on tape the different colors, but you should be able to see. Color code. A la gente que no están haciendo nada. Porque luego me dijo Ernesto, tráeme el café. Look at that. Massive antique rings. Take out the special bundle. Salamons only made for foreign dignitaries. Hardest cigar to find on the planet.